Welcome to the Shoot to Ill podcast, a podcast for any and all camera shooters. My name is Martin Depict. I'm a photographer, videographer, and graphic designer based in Los Angeles. Today, I'm going to do something different. So I did 2 streams in the last 2 days where I was finishing up the cover for issue number 2. Now, I'm a little bit behind, and typically, at the end of March, I wanted to release the full issue, but I haven't gotten around to laying out the full issue. And the editing for these beauty images is a little bit more intense. So I did one stream where I edited the whole photo, or one whole photo, which is probably 3.5 hours long. That's on my Patreon. And I did another stream that was shorter. I was hoping for it to be even shorter. This one ended up being 2 hours long. But in that stream, I sort of perfected the imagery a little bit more, added some effects, and then I made that image the cover of issue number 3, which you'll see here on the screen right now. So instead of a podcast episode like I typically do, I thought, why not show you guys what one of my streams looks like? And hopefully maybe some of you guys can join me over on my Patreon for more streams over at patreon.com/shoot2ill. I'm really happy with how the cover turned out. Obviously, I'm so picky about certain things, and I constantly question myself and my judgment on just like placement of fonts and all this stuff. But I cut all the doubt out of this stream and sort of shortened it for the podcast. I should mention that this episode is very visual heavy. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please head over to YouTube, as I think that's where you probably get the best experience for this episode. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Let's get right into it. All right, so this is the photo that we ended up choosing as the cover. Now, this is the photo without any editing. So I'm going to show you guys what it turned into as I sort of turn on these layers here on the right side of my screen. Let me make sure that I'm sharing my screen. Yep. Okay. So as I'm sort of going through these, so here's the based image. So this is the image basically straight out of the camera. And I'll zoom in a little bit more, actually, just so you guys could see. So here's the image straight out of the camera. This layer is my color correcting. So there's 2 different ways that I think that you can go about editing these type of images. You can go about adding a lot of sort of this skin texture towards the end of the editing process. I think without even trying, I added a lot more texture to these images, or to this image in particular, during the color correction process. So like in Lightroom, I boosted a little bit of the clarity, a little bit of the texture. Obviously, I'm always careful with the clarity slider, because if you boost that too much, it just looks a little bit dirty. But with the texture, I brought out a lot of that skin texture. And so through editing, I did not want to lose a lot of that texture. I wanted to keep a lot more of that natural texture. So so again, this is the original. This is color correcting and some masking and editing. So if you want to go check out the full process of how I color corrected and what I masked out, go ahead and check out the last stream on my Patreon. It's probably like the first 30 minutes of that one where we just concentrated on color correcting. But this is what we ended up with. The next layer, before I turn it on, let me just explain. The next layer is cleanup. So skin cleanup, I used the remove tool. I used the clone stamping tool. I used the patch tool. And I also did some liquefying to her face, so just adjusting small things to her jaw and her cheeks, as well as her nose, and I think her ear as well. So her right ear right now is a little bit out, so I just sort of liquefied that in, and I think I adjusted her lips as well. So let me just turn this on. So this is the before, and then this is the after. Now, right off the bat, there's some patches here that I noticed, and this is just sort of like my laziness as I sort of went through this the first time, is that I was working really quick, and I was using the remove tool and the clone stamping tool and the patch tool, and I just sort of like you know, I could have done this better, but there's like this patch here on the left side of her skin of her mouth, and this patch on the right side of her mouth, where just like the skin gets a little bit darker. I do go ahead and fix that, but I do think that I could have done this better right off the bat with this sort of first pass of cleanup, because doing it later, sometimes it affects the texture of the skin, and I fucked up. I fucked up here, but nevertheless, for what it is, I'm pretty happy with it. So the next layer on top of this is the frequency separation. So I'm gonna turn on the frequency separation. And so this evened out the skin tones, brought out a little bit of texture, not too much. I'll go ahead and turn off and on. So here's my high frequency and my low frequency. Again, I used the plugin for this. It's not a plugin, it's an action for this. So I used the Piximperfect action for this. It's listed on this YouTube. I'll list it down below in the YouTube video for the podcast, as well as this live stream. But it's such an easy way to sort of like separate your high and low frequency. And what I did different here, and I did two different things. So I did clone stamping, and then I also did color mixing. I used the color mixing brush. I don't use the color mixing brush often, but I do find that sometimes it's really nice to use, especially on areas like her chest and around her neck area, to sort of like blend in large amounts of skin like that. It really helps. So let me go ahead and show you guys what I did with the clone stamp. So this was all clone stamp. I'm turning this on and off here. And then here is the color mixing brush. So again, the color mixing brush just helps with that sort of like large area of skin, just sort of like evens out the skin tone there. Maybe that was a little bit too much, but I'm happy with that. And then I think this was also just like another patch clone stamp tool on top of it. So just sort of like evening out the skin tone under her right eye there. So that was frequency separation. Now next, on top of this, there was like another round of cleanup on top of this. So there's this where I just cleaned up like the left side of her armpit here. Again, I think that could have been done better, but and there's also like some parts on her neck and on her mouth that I sort of cleaned up as well. You know, this is just sort of me rushing. I should have took my time during it, but I think for what it is, I don't think you're going to be able to see that when it comes to the final image and the cover. And then I flattened that, which I'm not going to turn that layer on because we don't necessarily need. These next couple edits to this image were all sort of like cosmetic. So I'm zooming in here for these next couple edits. And so let me zoom in way into her eye here. So this next one was her iris. So I wanted to bring out some texture in her eye. So I added these like little streaks and lines in her iris. These are from a brush, from a Photoshop brush that I downloaded offline. There's a bunch of them available online. You can download them off of Envato for free. I found a pack that was sort of like a bunch of beauty brushes for like $37, I think, on a website called Shark Pixel. Again, you can find them for free, but I wanted to get them from a sort of like a source that did these type of brushes. So I added them to both eyes. So here's the right eye, and I'll turn it on and off again. So there's the iris on and off. So you can, it's very subtle. I also did it to the left eye. So very, very subtle, but I want some of that texture there for sure. Next, I did the eyebrows. So there's also a brush for the brows, which I did the left eyebrow. And up close, you can tell that they're not real. They're not real hairs, but from further away, you can't tell. So there's that, the left eyebrow, and then the right eyebrow. Then I added eyeliner. So that was just sort of to darken around the eyes just to sort of accentuate what the makeup artist had already done. Next one was eyelashes. So I added eyelashes to the bottom, particularly on the right eyelash. There was like some more spaces here that I felt needed to be filled in. So I added these with brushes. Again, I used the same brush from the same Photoshop brushes from Shark Pixel. They're great brushes, not sponsored, but I think that they worked well for what I needed. The next after that was evening out sort of like the eye, around the eye where there was like some little parts where the makeup didn't cover, and I did some cleanup. Now, again, up close, this isn't probably like the best that I could have done, but I was working quick. Again, this is my first time editing, you know, this sort of intensely with these types of images, but I was, you know, really happy with it. I also got rid of some like specks that were in her eye as well. I'll turn that on and off. So it's just sort of like perfecting that. Again, from far away, I don't think you can really tell. I think it looks great. Next came to dodging and burning. And so the dodging and burning, for me, there's a couple different ways that you can do dodging and burning. I mean, it's Photoshop. There's a bunch of different ways to do everything in Photoshop. So I know that most people do curve adjustment layers, where they'll make a curves adjustment layer, bring up the mids, and then they'll make another one, bring down the mids, and then they'll use the mask tool to just sort of like brighten and darken areas. Now, I don't do it that way. What I do is that I create a 50% gray layer. So here is my 50% gray layer, and I'll turn off the mask here. So here's my 50% gray layer, and I just went in with the burn tool, and I just sort of darkened the areas that I felt needed to be darkened. So this layer set to soft light, and when I also masked it to just affect the model, looked great. So this was at 100% opacity. I think this was too much. I set it originally to 50% opacity. So this was the before and after of just the burn. So that's just the burn. This is just sort of like small adjustments to just sort of add some contouring and some contrast around her face, on the sides of her face, on the bridge of her nose, things like that. Then I did the same thing with the burning. I'm sorry, with the dodging. Was it the dodge? Yeah, with the dodging. So dodging brightens, burns, darkens. And so I did the same thing, same 50% gray layer, and I just sort of dodged the areas where I felt needed to be brighter. So under her chin, her cheeks, her forehead, just down the middle of her face there. And I was pretty happy with how that turned out. Lastly, I did add a curves layer to just sort of even out the skin tone of this sort of part down the middle of her head. So I just created a curves adjustment layer, and I just sort of masked that part in to just sort of match that skin tone to her face. Lastly, I did two more flattened layers here. So I did one to sort of adjust her left eyebrow, because her left eyebrow was not even with her right. So I wanted to adjust that. So I went ahead and did that. So here, I'll zoom in and show you guys. So there was that small, tiny adjustment. And then this last one was just sort of like a little, I darkened right under the T line of her brow. And that's just sort of just added a little bit more realism, a little bit more dimension and depth to this image. And that was pretty much it. I added an overlaying adjustment layer to the whole thing to just sort of like bring down the shadows and some of the darker mids. But this was pretty much the final image. And then I added a little bit of grain on top of it. But I'm not going to keep the grain on for this. I wanted to finish this image. So in order to finish this image, there was little things that I think needed to be done here. and I'll sort of point out things that I think needs to be done. Um, so things that need to be done. There's some parts of the skin around her nose that I feel should be a little bit more even. So I want to even out this skin tone here without fucking with the texture of the image too much. And then there's also, I completely cleaned out the left eyebrow, but the right eyebrow still has a little bit of some baby hairs here. So I want to clean up these baby hairs using the remove tool. So that shouldn't be too hard. After I do that, I think I'm just going to add some overlaying effects to the image. Maybe some blooming, maybe a little bit of motion blur. And then after that, we're going to add it to the cover and make it the cover for my March project. Now, I am running behind on this project because I have work that sort of is obviously more important. Not more important than this project, but it's more important to my livelihood. So I need to make sure that my client work is, I keep it, priority. So I'm going to make another layer on top of this flattened layer here. And I'm going to go in with the remove tool. So the remove tool, if you guys haven't used it before, it's a new tool that I think Photoshop just added this year. And I think it uses some of the generative capabilities that Photoshop is adding. So I'll do sample all layers here. And I'm just going to paint over with a very small brush. I'm just going to paint over these hairs, and it should just remove it just like that. And I'll zoom in a little bit more just so you guys get to see. So this was a lot of what I did during the last stream, was a lot of this sort of like minute detail. So my last stream, I'm sorry to say, was probably a little bit boring. If you go back and watch it in 2x speed, because it was a lot of editing like this, a lot of just sort of tedious things that needed to be cleaned out. And because it was live, there was no way for me to fast forward through it. But still, I think it's sort of like necessary to just sort of see what needs to be done when it comes to these types of images. I usually toggle between the remove tool and what was the other one? The clone stamping tool, the spot healing brush tool. They're two very similar brushes. I think this one uses more generative fill. The other one tries to, depending on what you're trying to edit out. Like if you look closely here, sometimes it gets rid of the texture, which is not what we want. We want to sort of retain that texture. Like there, like it just completely got rid of some of that skin texture, which is fine. When it's sort of like this close into it. And again, I think I'm just being very hypercritical of myself here. Now, if you've done some of these beauty photography photos, or if you've edited beauty photography before, I would love to get your feedback as someone who's sort of new to the space. I think that what I'm doing here is comparable to some of the work that's out there, and I do think that if I add this to my portfolio, which is my goal of these projects, is to come up with images that I can add to my portfolio to get more work. And so I am happy with this product, with this final product that I'm working on. It's just, I just want to make sure that if I were to shoot something that's maybe a little bit more colorful, that I'm able to sort of, be more consistent with it. Obviously, the editing here is why a lot of photographers charge what they charge. The editing here is insane. Like you guys, we're charging, or you guys are charging for your expertise in Photoshop and how to manipulate the image. And I'm pretty confident sort of like manipulating faces and sort of making small minute adjustments to, face shapes and nose bridges and stuff like that. But it's you don't ever to want it to make it look like it's too much, right? So these small changes here, like again, like I should have caught them while I was editing the first pass, but I think it works fine for what it is. Like, it's also too, when I'm editing this, I'm wondering what looks more natural. Like, what is pleasing? What is a pleasing skin texture and what is not a pleasing skin texture? Like for me, these sort of like little bumps here, like I'm just gonna edit them out. But this skin texture is, I feel like, what we would want. This skin texture here is not what we would want. So I'm just sort of like trying to, I guess, be more picky with what sort of texture we want here in this final product. It's weird, to be honest. Like I just I would need to study this for a lot longer to sort of figure out what it is exactly that I want out of these images, or I guess what my client would want out of these images. I mean, the model already had pretty flawless skin. There wasn't a lot of skin editing that I needed to do. It's more of just sort of figuring out what is the standard here. To change the background. So I'm going to select subject here. It should do a pretty good job of selecting the subject. Like her outline is pretty good here. So I shouldn't see any, I mean, there's some imperfections. I guess it depends on how perfect I want it to be, but I can go in and perfect it here with the lasso tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press Command J and then select that layer. So I'm going to hold Command and click on that layer to make the selection. And then I'm going to create a mask for this layer, for the layer under it. Actually, I should just create the mask. So I'm creating the mask. And then I'm gonna adjust the layer for the one under it here. So maybe we'll play around with some color here and see what pops out best. But first, let's play around with the adjustment layers. So let's do a curves here. We can do a darker. I mean, darker looks good, to be honest. And then we'll do hue and saturation, and we'll do colorize. I like blue. Ooh, purple with her skin tone. Fire. All right, so we'll do purple. So that looks fire there. All right, so we'll do purple. And it's Easter, you know? Gives it some of that Easter vibe. All right, so I'm happy with the purple. I'm going to now go back to this top layer and sort of just paint in the pieces of the mask that where you see like sort of these imperfections here. So with the brush, I'm just gonna go in. Small brush, too small. There we go. And I'll just paint this in. So I'm not gonna have much issue here with the hair. I'll have issue when I get closer to her ears, and you guys will see right now because her hair is black. So the hue of the hair isn't being affected too much. But as soon as I get to her skin, see that? So I want to be a little bit more careful when I'm around her skin here. So I'm just gonna be very careful. And it's okay to have a little bit of some of this coloring spill over onto her skin because some of that like bounce is natural. Not bounce, what's the word? It's called casting. Perfect, more perfect, yeah, definitely. But in the sake of moving forward and not having this stream be another 3 hours, I think I'm gonna call it there. All right, so now let's add the motion blur effect here. So let's do Command J, Command E. So now this is just like the finished purple layer on top of it. And then we're gonna go blur, motion blur. Let's go even more because I want it to be crazy obvious. All right, so 20% or 2000 pixels. Oh, yeah, I guess that's okay. And then we're gonna go with the brush. And just sort of mask out here. And I'll lower the opacity just a little bit. We'll go 85. I can even paint some of this back in. And maybe not. Her smile lines here are maybe too dark. So I'm just gonna, what should I do? Mask them out, I guess. Fine. I just don't want it to be on her skin. So it's fine if it looks like it's behind her. I just don't want it to look like it's on her skin. Same thing here. That's fine. Cool. And then now we're going to do another one. So Command J, Command E. And then put this on top of it. And then we're going to go motion blur. Or sorry, Gaussian blur. So we're going to go Gaussian blur. Let's actually set this to a smart object. That way I can mess with the effect. And we'll set this to screen. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. We'll sort of, we'll go pretty crazy with this. We'll go, I think that's fine. So 160, 176. And then I'm going to lower the opacity quite a bit. So like 35. Cool. So there's that. Now I want to add some texture here. The question is what texture to add. Oh, Xerox texture. Fucking perfect. Xerox texture. The thing is that if I make it too dirty, it's gonna affect the what we're trying to sort of display with the image, and we want to sort of keep the we want to keep the makeup as the hero. So maybe I'll lower the opacity of this and also lower the opacity of the blur. So let's go 70 with the motion. Let's go 80 with the motion, and then even lower. Let's go 20 with the bloom effect. So that works there. And then let's just see what the texture looks like. I think that's okay. Very judgmental here. And then let's add the grain back. Okay. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with this. I think this looks fucking sick. Let's look at the before and after. Damn, so many fucking layers. All right, so before and then after. Nice. Wow. All right, cool. Now we got to make this the cover. So I'm going to save this, which is going to take 20 minutes because it's a very large TIFF PSB file. I am really happy with this image. I think that, you know, like the more I look at it, the more I think that could have been done to make it even better. But for what it is, I think it looks pretty sick. I don't know. I guess you're your own worst critic, right? Like I am definitely like my own worst critic when it comes to these types of things, especially when it comes to things that I'm not necessarily sure of. So specifically like beauty photography is a completely different beast. It's a different realm that I've never really worked in before. But if I was going to send this to a potential client, like a potential makeup client, and I'm like, hey, I can do like glamour shots for you, I would hope that they would see this and they would say like, wow, that's really great. I don't know, like even looking at this, saving at 50%, by the way, even looking at this, like these slightly darker shadows here, like, I don't know if that should be edited out. Let's see. I don't know. I don't know. Like, I still think that I edited too much texture out of the right side of her lip. Like this sort of, when I edited out her laugh line, I still think maybe I edited at edited out that too much. What else? Like, did I leave too much texture in her lips? Is that bad? Should I have evened out the color in her lips? You know, that's always a question. But like, honestly, all of it together, looking at it as a cohesive project or file, I'm really happy with her skin tone. I'm really happy with most of the editing decisions that I made. I'm really happy with the color of the backdrop that we used. If you're going to be editing a lot of the stuff, by the way, if you're in the entertainment world, a lot of people are shot on gray and then they're edited or composited into other things. And the reason why they're shot on gray and not on green or on blue screen like in video is that in video, keying out those colors is much easier to sort of like edit in something else, because they're easy trackable colors. But with photography, when you shoot on gray, it's a very neutral color that can be selected in a single file, in a single frame, and it doesn't leave any color casting on the skin. There's no sort of like effects like that. Like if I were to shoot this on a green screen, I will get like some sort of like green haloing around the subject, maybe even some casting on the skin that I would have to correct in post. So I always suggest shooting on gray if you plan to sort of composite the photos in later with something else. All right, so here's the file of the first issue. So we're working on issue 2, project 3. And so I guess we'll go with the same sort of layout. I think when it comes to this image, I think it's going to be more face. So like right here, sort of I included his hands here. So here, maybe I'll sort of place her face right here with maybe a little bit of her shoulder showing, but not too much. And then maybe we'll choose a different font. But we can go ahead and start changing this. So we'll go. Well, that's it for today's episode, guys. Appreciate you guys watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please, again, like, comment, subscribe down below. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a good review. But like always, appreciate you guys. Keep shooting. Peace.